Welcome, everyone. I call the April 6, 2022 Planning Commission meeting to order. The main purposes of tonight's meeting are study sessions on middle housing and parking reductions near frequent transit. Before we move on to the agenda items, I'd like to acknowledge our remote meeting format. As with our previous meetings, the commissioners and staff will be participating via Zoom. During this Zoom meeting, the chat and question functions will not be available for use to ensure compliance with the Open Public Meetings Act. We have a public comment agenda item at the beginning of the meeting. This time is for comments on issues not on tonight's agenda. Please limit these comments to 3 minutes. Under Governor Inslee's Proclamation 20-28 regarding open public meetings, this meeting will be held remotely. Public comment will be allowed both in writing and orally. The Imagine Bothell notice, city website, and tonight's agenda all provided information to the public for providing comments. People wishing to comment were instructed to notify staff or provide written comments by 3 p.m. today. The video of this meeting will be streamed live as well as recorded and available for later viewing on the city's YouTube channel. A call-in number was provided on the meeting agenda for members of the public who wish to call in by phone to listen live to the meeting. For our phone-in callers, during staff presentations, staff will make every effort to specify which materials they are referencing so that everyone may follow along. Those who provided advance notice are able to make comments under the audience comments section of the meeting. Email was encouraged as well and will be acknowledged. At this point, we'll take a moment to acknowledge the attendance of the commissioners, and I will call on you by position number. Commissioner Dodd?
Present.
Commissioner Westerbeck?
Present.
Vice Chair Curd is absent and excused. Commissioner Robson?
Present.
Commissioner Anders?
Present.
And Commissioner Gustafson?
Present.
Thank you, commissioners. In addition, Community Development Director Michael Cotterman, Senior Planner Dave Boyd, and Sarah Frost, Community Engagement Specialist, are in attendance. We also have Sarah Breakstone with OTAX Consultants attending this evening. Lastly, before we begin, I'd like to reiterate some meeting guidelines. For all meeting attendees, please speak clearly and pause frequently. State your name each time before speaking. Mute your microphone when not speaking. If you are also streaming the live video feed, please turn off the sound as there is a delay. For commissioners, at specific breaks in the presentation, I will be calling on members who wish to speak or ask a question. If you wish to speak, please indicate this by using the raise hand function, and I will strive to check the ribbon for those who are seeking to provide input. This will help avoid the problem of having 2 people speaking at the same time. Identify yourself before you ask a question, make a motion, second a motion, or participate in debate. Please mute your microphone when not speaking, and of course, unmute when speaking. The first item on the agenda is public comment. Keeping with Governor Inslee's Emergency Proclamation 20-28 regarding public gatherings and open public meetings, the city has accepted visitor comment in writing, as well as accepted sign-up sheets for those who wish to speak at tonight's meeting. Written comments submitted to staff no later than 3 p.m. today were forwarded to all commissioners and are part of the record. I have not seen any forwarded, so I expect that we receive none. Is that correct, Dr. Cotterman?
That is correct, Mr. Chair. I didn't receive any. I don't know if Dave, did you receive anything today?
No, I did not.
Okay, and we have no one in the attendee room, Mr. Chair.
All right, then. So with that, we will end the public comment portion of the meeting. Next agenda item is approval of the minutes. We have before us the minutes of the March 16 meeting. Is there a motion to approve those minutes? Commissioner Robson.
Motion to approve.
Okay, there is a motion to approve. Is there a second?
I will second the motion to approve the minutes.
All right, it has been moved and seconded to approve the minutes of the March 16 meeting. Any discussion around those minutes? Scanning commissioners and seeing no indication of any discussion. All in favor of approving those minutes, please signify. You can see also, we can raise hands. Commissioner Gustafson? Yep. All right. All commissioners have indicated by raising their hands approval of the minutes. So the minutes of the March 16th meeting are approved as submitted. Thank you, commissioners. Next item, new business. Director Cotterman, any new business for the commission?
I have no new business, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Thank you. That will bring us on to the study session portion of the meeting. The first item we have before us is middle housing, and I'm going to assume Senior Planner Boyd will lead us through this item.
Thank you, and good evening, Chair and Commission members. I'd also like to acknowledge that we're being joined tonight again by Sarah Breakstone from OTAC. I'll go through the presentation and ask her to chime in on certain points and be available to answer questions and address comments by the commissioners. So I'll go ahead and start sharing my screen. So again, this is a continued study session on middle housing code amendments. The purpose is to continue the discussion of potential code amendments to enable a range of middle housing options. We started with the proposal to allow up to 4 plexes in single family zones, starting with new subdivisions, but we've heard from the commission that we would like to go beyond that and allow that in all single family zones. And also look at other options, potentially including cottages, courtyard apartments, and expanded ADUs. We're open to other ideas as well. This work is funded by a grant from the Department of Commerce, and we continue to work with OTAC following on the work that they helped us with on corner lot duplexes. Just to touch on the background and include a couple of images from of middle housing in the Lower Maywood district. These zone amendments are supported by some of the top tier 1's priorities in our housing strategy to allow flexibility for innovative housing types and to provide provisions for affordable housing with capacity increases and to provide affordable housing for families. So since we started this with a study session on November 3rd, we had a middle housing walking tour in December. Middle housing was subject of a story in KUW that came out shortly after that. Featuring Bothell. We got council feedback on the early discussions on middle housing during the docket discussion in January. We have been following the legislation that was going through the legislature this year. It didn't advance, but we're seeing some direction in that, and I think trying to be ready to move ahead of that and be prepared for that when it comes. We at the last study session on March 16th, we presented additional research on middle housing efforts elsewhere and have a little more additional analysis and research to present tonight. The graph there shows the growth in accessory dwelling unit construction in Seattle following, particularly the spike following major efforts to remove impediments in 2019. We also participated in a state of housing webinar in February that was put on by BOPOP and the North Urban Human Services Alliance. We received recognition for Bothell housing efforts, including our ongoing efforts on middle housing at Housing Development Consortium luncheon last week. And we presented the work that we've done to date to the Development Services Advisory Group just over a week ago, and got some great feedback there. So for anyone who's tuning in, I'm gonna repeat this, go over this quickly, but so we're talking about house scale buildings with multiple units in walkable neighborhoods that fills a need for housing in between single family homes and larger apartments. So as shown in the diagram here, it could be a transitional zone, or it can also be scattered through a single family area. And much of the effort that we've done has been the latter. This is some new analysis that we had for the DSAG meeting, and that OTAC put together for us. And it basically just illustrates the variety of that and the flexibility that developers would have for some different bonus ratios in a new subdivision. So this is the same subdivision that was used earlier as an example. It's an existing subdivision, new subdivision in West Hill. And here, it's slightly different in this in these analyses, but basically it shows duplexes on the corner lots as part of the baseline. Those are the brownish units. The single family units are the gray. And then it shows a variety of either duplexes, triplexes, or fourplexes. And this is just to show that there's quite a range of different options for developers. They could do more duplexes, they could do and fewer single family homes, or they could do more fourplexes and have more single family homes as part of their mix. And these show different bonuses. We started off talking about a 20% bonus, but there was certainly interest in going further. So the scenarios on the left are with a 20% bonus. The four to the right of that are a 25% bonus. And these were all in the attachment 1 of your packet. There are 4 scenarios with a 30% bonus, and then 5 scenarios with a 40% bonus. So all of them, even the 40% bonus with we're utilizing duplexes as the middle housing option, still have a significant number of single family homes, but at that point at the 40% bonus, the single family homes remaining in the mix are the minority. So we're still doing ongoing analysis on how much we can increase density without a comp plan amendment or more extensive environmental analysis. I've had discussions since we met last with our SEPA responsible official, with our deputy city attorney that focuses on land use issues. And there is no, I think one thing that came out of the last study session was a desire for a bright line threshold, and there really isn't one. And we need to do some more work internally to get at where we think is a reasonable upper limit that we can explore. And the analyses we've done going up to 40% kind of are we think are pushing that that upper limit or approaching it at least. We have an ongoing question about whether these amendments should just deal with the physical form of the housing, or whether we will get into some of the ownership issues with this, or whether that's an item that we can address in future amendments. We're still exploring incentives for the more affordable types of middle housing to see if we can get more stacked, 2-over-2 fourplexes, or even stacked triplexes, triple decker type housing options that will likely be more affordable than what the market is providing, primarily where they can do attached housing, which has been townhomes on either on fee simple lots or through a condominium structure. So that's something that we need some additional time to suss out. We have looked into what we can do as a city to restrict homeowners associations from banning middle housing. And the initial input from our legal department is that we can't go back in time. We can't make that retroactive, but we can, even absent the state legislation that would have explicitly allowed this, we can put restrictions on new homeowners associations. So we will likely address that in the code amendments. We're still looking at minimum densities or other ways to encourage or require middle housing in new subdivisions, at least near transit, and don't have anything new to provide you in terms of the affordability provisions. We still need to get Arch's analysis, more detailed analysis, but we are pretty confident that we're talking around 10% in new subdivisions where we allow a bonus in density. Roughly 10% of the units would be affordable at somewhere in the range of 60 to 80%, and which may vary on whether it's ownership or rental housing. And then another issue that we've started looking into, but still need to do some more analysis internally, are the building and fire code and design standard implications. That was one area that came out strong in the feedback from DSAG, is that that we can make these changes in the code, but without changes in the standards, and we can make these changes to the zoning code, but without changes in the standards and consideration of building and fire code implications. We may not get what we're looking for. So another reason that we didn't come back to you with proposed code amendments at this point, as we had intended, was that as we started the outreach effort, I guess we really started the outreach effort with the housing forum to some degree, and then more specifically targeted outreach on middle housing to DSAG. We really feel like we need to take some time to do more community outreach. And our recommendations for that is to strengthen the information that we have available on our website, and that work is underway. We would propose to do a community open house, possibly in conjunction with the May 18th Planning Commission meeting, and then to provide an online survey, and potentially also an even simpler way to submit comments online along with the information on the website. And we're certainly open to other ideas for doing community outreach and engaging a broader section of the population. So with that, that concludes my presentation. I'll take questions and clarifications on my presentation, and Sarah Breakstone can address questions on their analysis and their preliminary recommendations memo. We would like to hear from you about whether we've captured Planning Commission direction to date accurately. I don't believe we have any any public yet. But we're certainly open for additional discussion from the commission. And as I said earlier, we think the next meeting may be a community open house held either in conjunction with the May 18th Planning Commission or sometime in that time frame. We're still working out the details of that. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and open it up for questions. And also, Sarah, if there's anything you wanted to add in particular before we get questions, feel free to jump in.
You need to say which Sarah, Dave.
Oh, I'm
Yeah,
sorry,
we've
Sarah
got
breaks
two.
I
down.
assume you meant me. Yeah.
Sarah with an E.
Yeah. Nothing to add right now. Thanks, Dave.
Okay.
And I did check, Mr. Chair, there are no attendees in the other room.
All right, thank you for checking that, and thank you for your presentation, Senior Planner Boyd. I see that Commissioner Gustafson would like to speak.
Thank you, Chair Kieran. Sarah Gustafson here. In reading the draft memo, my question is, are we going to touch upon the scheme, I guess, to offer developers reduced parking minimums in exchange for providing affordable housing? Is that part of the current discussion?
I think that I'll start with that one. Sarah, feel free to jump in if you have more to add. But the direction we've gotten to date has been to do something similar to what we've done for what we did with corner lot duplexes within quarter, half mile of frequent transit or regional trails, that for the middle housing units. So to provide an incentive, or at least not create a disincentive for those units by sticking with our current parking requirement of essentially 2.2 spaces per unit outside of downtown and Canyon Park. And then as far as affordable units, if the overlap there would be in new subdivisions. We haven't discussed to date any specific parking reductions for affordable housing, but in the parking reductions near transit, there could be some overlap in those measures and in the middle housing measures that would result in parking reductions that would be tied to affordable housing.
Commissioner Westerbeck.
Thank you. Thanks for your presentation, Senior Planner Boyd. This is Kerry Westerbeck. I've got a number of questions, but I'll just address one or two right now. We've focused a lot on new development and bonuses. I still feel a little unclear on if we're providing existing neighborhoods, single-family neighborhoods, to allow duplex, triplex, fourplex, cottages, et cetera. And it's kind of touched on in various places in the packet materials. But I know there was the issue about how much density can we add without getting into ECA issues or environmental issues for density. So I'm just curious about that, because I still feel it's really important for us to provide a lot of choice if we do a missing middle housing code change. And that addresses some of the stuff later in the packet, that people, whether they're going to be popular developers or not, they should be able to do a bungalow court, a cottage court, whatever we should sort of have outlined, like Olympia and other cities have done, and many cities have done it. Just if you're going to do this, these are the code requirements for cottage court, bungalow court, townhouses, et cetera. And also, I think some of the lowest hanging fruit for us doing missing middle is people who have a big house or a house period that they could divide into duplex, triplex, fourplex, which has been done for eons. And not many people are going to do it, but some people are going to do it. And I can't help but think about big families where they've got several generations in the house with 3 or 4 cars. Maybe they've got several teenage drivers. multiple bedrooms and bathrooms, and they're almost like a small apartment building in a big house. And it's not much different than someone turning a house into a triplex. So they'd have to obviously do some permitting and some meter changes and things like that go along with that. But I was hoping we could speak to that a little bit tonight. I wasn't clear in the packet whether we were tackling that or not. So wanted to put that out there.
Okay, well, first of all, I would say that yes, the direction we've heard from Planning Commission is that we should allow middle housing in all single family zones. So the new analysis that we've done was focused on subdivisions and trying to get at the question of what sort of density bonus is appropriate.
Okay.
But we will add them now. You mentioned cottages and courtyard housing. So we can allow up to fourplexes and stick true to the concept of single family home size dwellings. Sure. When we get into cottages and courthouses, they're a little bit different. I think will require a slightly different approach. So that's one area that I think we need to do a little further analysis. And as far as the environmental analysis, what we've learned, and Sarah Breakstone OTAC has done most of the research on this, but other jurisdictions that have allowed up to fourplexes, or some have allowed up to triplexes in single family zones. The analysis has been that only a certain percentage, a fairly low percentage of the total number of single family property owners will do this. And we're trying to kind of, well, I don't know, so as we're looking at what the overall impact of this will be, we are going to draw to some degree on the research that other jurisdictions have done.
Yeah, I brought that before. I know in my reading of LA and other cities have found over time that a pretty small percentage take advantage of it. And I know around here, it was because of the work I do doing feasibility studies and designs for people that, and I've probably mentioned this, because of the increasing cost of just getting even an old house, a tear down on a piece of land, we're going from where two units penciled and now it's 4 units, and maybe we're 5 or 6 now. So we keep chasing. They can do. A lot of people are $1.5 million down. They can't afford to do triplex anymore. Maybe they have to do a 4 or 5 or 6. So that'll limit it too. And then, as you well know, there are a lot of as I asked for if I was on planning commission, there are lots of code sections designed, here's a cottage code section, here's a bungalow court section of the code to plug in or tweak, whatever. I know Ross Chapin has one, though it's not my favorite, even though I love his projects. So yeah, I'm aware we have to, that's kind of what I was getting at. I was just hoping that eventually we'll address that, or that will get pulled in by whenever we take this to council and OTAC builds language, writes language for us. That's all.
I will add that the legislation that Oregon adopted last year, the House Bill 2001, our middle housing bill, it came with a model code. Yeah. And the model code has design standards in it for all of these middle housing types. And they're, they're not perfect, but they're a great, they're a great starting point, and it's there and it's available. And it's a great way to kind of pull from what's out there and tweak it to make it fit your community and make it work.
That's what I was hoping for.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. The other thing I was going to mention, just you touched on kind of like converting a single family home to a triplex, for example. A lot of that's going to live in your building code, really. Although I think
we have to allow it first. So.
Yeah. And I think your definition of middle housing or triplex will include, new development or conversion of into, and then what you'll need to decide is, what's the threshold for applying design standards if you adopt design standards? Because that'll
I have
do those get triggered or do they not get triggered? by a conversion. That'll be something to think about, but
When I've had to deal with them, we usually have to deal with separate heat, power, fire
water sometimes.
separations, water. So there are
Mhm.
utility and fire rating issues. So that there is a remodeling involved.
Yeah.
So I totally hear that.
Where it
Thank you,
gets
Sarah.
where it gets somewhat complicated, where one area where it gets somewhat complicated is when you get into the different ownership models and how that affects things like well, hookup fees, other impact fees, and whether you need to have separate meters or sub meters, and so we're started to tackle those issues with our utilities group. Just had a meeting on that this morning, but that's going to take some additional work. And as we do that work, I think we've gotten enough direction from Planning Commission on sort of the general direction. We don't need to get as for the public outreach. I don't think we need to nor want to get into too much of the details. We want to be able to describe this fairly simply and get feedback on the basic idea of middle housing, and so that's the strategy at this point.
I'm just jumping the gun, making sure we're thinking about that, and obviously you are, so I appreciate it.
All right, other commissioners. So I'd like to ask Sarah Frost what your thoughts are on getting more community input. And I'll take a leap of faith here and speak with the other commissioners. We'd like to hear what that feedback is. If you're targeting about 6 weeks out for that meeting, do you have anything in progress right now? Any thoughts or actions to share with us?
Thank you, Chair, and hello, Commissioners. Not yet. Part of that was because we wanted to sort of introduce this idea to you all. And 6 weeks is about the right time that you need to get any sort of viable engagement. And every time you do engagement, you're going to get a little bit more response. It's sort of not a bell curve, but you get the idea. So I think this first time, I don't know what to expect. So it's sort of the first time we will have gone out recently and said, hey, community, we want your feedback. So I think starting with small, easy steps like that online survey, like getting information out and just getting general feedback from people, it's going to give us a lot of information about where the gaps in their understanding are, what we need to clarify for them. It's going to tell us a lot about the general sentiment of the community. And then I think once you get to that, we can be doing that all up until that maybe May 18th meeting, hypothetically. And then that's where all of those people can come and go, okay, we asked you these questions, Bothell, tell us what you think. Let's have the conversation. Let's open up that dialogue. And you'll get a little bit more of that direct engagement. But I mean, setting up a survey online or a feedback box isn't super challenging. The trick is getting people to know that it's there and to go there and do that. But we have great social media interaction in the Bothell community. And so I think starting there would be a good place. But I don't want to just willy-nilly go out there and start. So that's the idea.
Thank you. Commissioner Dodd?
Chair, and thanks, Sarah. I wanted to float an idea that may be a little more work for you, so I apologize in advance. But I was wondering, as we seek engagement from the community, if obviously an easy way to just send in feedback is important for people who don't want to go through like a presentation. But I think sometimes, and I've experienced this myself as a resident, we say, here's something we're going to change, or here, and even if it's a good change or it's a well thought out change, obviously we've been talking about it forever, and our guides are city staff who have lots of credentials and years working on this stuff. But I think there's an instinctual desire to say, oop, don't like it. I like things the way they are. Thank you. So if we can involve some education in the outreach, I think that would be really helpful to make sure that the feedback we get is actionable and well thought out. So
Absolutely. That's yes, exactly. Because a lot of people don't know what we're talking about or don't see that a project is happening until it's already started. And then at that point, the feedback or questions or whatever that they might have aren't useful because the decisions have already been made. So the idea behind this is to sort of jumpstart that and say, hey, here's the conversation we're having in Planning Commission, which by the way, you're welcome to come be an attendee for if you want to know more. Here's where all that information lives. Here's the plain speak to what we're talking about. And now we want your feedback on that. So that's exactly it.
And I think just to tack on to that, what we talked about in a previous conversation was that that even with the survey that gets put together, I mean, that there can be an education piece in that. It'll be a fairly straightforward education piece, but there will be information in there that is presented visually, I think, and clearly sort of like here's an example of what we're talking about. Do you like this? Do you like that? To try to work the education into the questions that we're asking so they don't really understand that they're even like being educated. I think that's helpful, and we can help provide some of those materials for that.
thank you. That's great
Senior
to
Planner
hear.
Boyd?
Oh,
Yeah,
sorry.
that was a great question from Commissioner Dodd. And so that's why I started with beefing up and really getting a lot of information onto our webpage in a really easily understood way. And also with enough depth so that those who really want to get into it further can get more detail if they want it. But to give some good, concise information right up front. And that's what we'll be working on. That'll be the first task. One thing I wanted to add on to it is we've also talked about focus groups. And so that's something that we're considering depending on the initial feedback we get from community open house and survey. So if we kind of identify a group of folks, especially with some different perspectives on it, that would be another technique that we could follow up that with more in-depth focus group type activities.
Thank you. Other commissioners? Okay, well, there's no action requested of us this evening. Thank you for your presentation. We are, as you know, very interested in this topic. We'll look forward to seeing your ideas on outreach. Outreach on policy matters is very challenging. It's hard to get people's attention. So I wish you luck on that, and we'll be we'll be following. So with that, I guess we'll move on to our next study session item, which is parking reductions near frequent transit. And with that, Sarah Breakstone will be signing off. Is that correct?
Yes, I will.
Okay.
Have a good night, everyone. Thank you.
Participation.
Thank you,
for your
Sarah.
feedback here.
Thanks, Sarah.
And Senior Planner Boyd, next up.
And before I dive into that, I just wanted to say a couple of other things. I know many of you are very interested in this topic, and so if you have good examples to pass on, photographs, illustrations, drawing, please do so. We're in the gathering mode, and we'll most likely draw heavily on the missing middle housing website from Opticos Design, which has some great graphics as well. And then one other follow-on thing that we are hoping for and will promote as part of this outreach effort is to try to get more of the community engaged in these meetings. So use the community open house as a way to channel more feedback, community feedback into our planning commission meetings. So to switch gears a little bit and into parking reductions near frequent transit, I'm going to share a
Mr. Chair, I believe Commissioner Westerbeck has his hand up before Dave gets rolling on his presentation.
Yeah.
I
Okay,
promise
yeah.
I'll be brief.
Yeah, Commissioner Westerbeck.
Just to add to Senior Planner Boyd's comment there, I'm again involved in, I had a professor at the UW, Rick Muller, who's a Seattle Planning Commissioner, and Matt Hutchins, who also is a planning commissioner, both architects. Anyway, we're doing another missing middle housing studio this spring. And I was involved in the last one just at the beginning of the pandemic, and they're having another one. And I won an award last time. There was such good work. And I'll be presenting my fourplex, and several other architect developers I hang out with who are going to do the same. So anyway, I will try and keep this brief. I will share that, what I learned, or any interesting info from that, examples and so forth that they've put together with the commission as it's useful. So just wanted to mention that.
Thank you. We'll look forward to that. So, Dave?
Yeah, thank you. And share the information for if we can actually participate or attend that as well.
Okay. Yeah, it might be Zoomed or usually the public's allowed to. And I know you're an alumni too, Dave. So.
Oops.
There we go.
Before you dive in, I just saw Commissioner Gustafson raise her hand.
Hi, thank you, Chair, and thanks everyone for presenting on the missing middle. I realized I had one more question. I think this commission has had a really interesting debate on whether affordability requirements should be applied to smaller developments. And I'm not sure if we've come to a consensus on that. I don't know how I feel. I've heard arguments both ways, and I'm wondering, would it make sense for us to try to put out a motion or a finding to summarize our views, or do we leave that for council?
Well, when we transmit our recommendations on the code amendment, there will be findings associated with that and recommendations. And the commission can, we have to be on the topic, but we can insert a number of findings in there and a number of recommendations. We've done that on other topics. So I think right now we'd be giving Dave feedback as he does his analysis. And then when time comes for the commission to take an action in those findings and recommendations, we would insert something there. And it's always good to kind of have something prepared to discuss when that time comes. Dave, do you have a feedback?
Yeah, I think the code amendment recommendations will include a threshold, and the current threshold that we've used has been that we apply affordability provisions to developments of 5 or more. I have raised earlier whether to keep that or whether potentially to adjust it, especially if we get into infill options like courtyard housing, where you combine 2 lots and do 6 or maybe even 8 units. Whether we should adjust that threshold. Also, the threshold was established. One of the rationales for 5 or more was at the time that was our threshold for short plats. So now that we've changed that, we may consider that. Another factor was for developments of less than 10 units, if your requirement is that 10% of the units be affordable, in a way that might be a reasonable threshold. However, even if it's lower, even if the requirement leads to a partial unit, that will lead to in lieu fees potentially. So. And there's a benefit in getting those fees as well to support even deeper affordability housing in affordable housing projects. So again, that's another issue that I think we've gotten some feedback from Planning Commission that there's some interest in potentially raising that threshold, but we're still trying to formulate a good recommendation to bring back to you, and then that would be part of your recommendation to council. So.
Thank you. Yes, I've heard Commissioner Westerbeck on it, and then I think I really agree with it. And then I heard Commissioner Anders on it, and I think, well, I really agree with that. They have two different ways of looking at the same thing, so it's hard to decide. So I'm glad that we'll have more time to really dig into a debate. Thank you.
Okay, ready to move on to parking reductions?
Yes, I believe we are.
Okay. Okay. There we go. Okay. So again, this is another continued study session, and I'm afraid we have maybe even less new to present. At least we did for the packet, but since then I do have some new material that I'm ready to share with you tonight. But going back to the purpose, this is to expand provisions for reduced parking requirements near frequent transit. And it started with the Planning Commission recommendation to extend the state mandated provisions for market rate housing from a quarter mile to half mile. And the council's decision to do an additional analysis to look at whether that expansion beyond the state mandate could justify some affordable housing provisions. So we've done some initial analysis of that that shows that we could require between 5 and 7% of the units in those with the parking reductions that we've considered so far. We will need to do some additional analysis and also consider additional reductions in some cases as justified by a parking study. So the general direction we've gotten is to keep it as simple as possible to allow a certain level of reductions and to by right, as we have with the state mandates, but allow the flexibility of additional reductions through a parking study with affordable housing requirements. So that analysis, again, is still ongoing. And one thing that we realized as we looked back at the provisions for transit-related parking reductions that date back to the 90s is that we already had a fairly large area of the city was already to some degree covered by those. So that's going to affect our analysis. We can't require affordable housing for reductions that we do that are already allowed. So what you see in this graphic, the previous graphic showed the transit stops that met the frequent transit thresholds in the state code. But the 90s transit-related parking reductions from our code are incremental. Almost any bus stop, it's based on the number of transit runs within the morning and the evening rush hour. So, and it gives you a 2% reduction for each transit run within those time frames. So almost any stop is going to at least have a small reduction available. It also only applies to an 1/8 mile radius, which is unusual for transit reductions tied to or parking reductions tied to transit. It's usually at least a 1/4 mile. So what this graphic shows is the 8 mile reductions in the darker purple, and all of the transit stops are the black dots. And then in the lighter shades, quarter and half miles circles. So that's something that we can consider, making some revisions to those existing provisions, and certainly we need to consider what is already allowed in our analysis for the affordability requirements associated with proximity to transit. So if we, and then we also need to consider, the areas where we already have reduced the parking, which is in the downtown sub area and Canyon Park. So the analysis that's been done so far has been on a hypothetical area that isn't within these areas where we have existing transit reductions or existing parking reductions, and it didn't really take into account the pre-existing transit reductions that are available. So this map combines the two areas, the high frequency bus stops that are shown with the orange dots, and there's and with quarter and half mile radii around those, and then the lower frequency bus stops in the small green dots with the 8th mile circles around them. So this is really what exists now in our code. And so one thing that we want to, and the other thing that shows here are the outlines of the downtown sub area and the Canyon Park Regional Growth Center, where we already have reduced parking with transit service in mind. So the focus really of these code amendments will be on the areas where we're expanding the state mandate from quarter to half mile for market rate housing, and any areas where there's overlap outside of those two sub areas with frequent transit and the existing provisions. We've also heard that the Planning Commission supports allowing these reductions for future planned transit, such as the Swift line shown in the green star. And we've also raised the question, and I think heard pretty solid support for also being more proactive and allowing them in some of the areas where we may want to be encouraging future growth, Nike Hill, North Creek Business Park, and Brickyard Road. And fortunately, those are already areas that do have some concentration of transit already. So approaches, we talked last time about adding a finding in support of parking management, and we're also looking further into parking management requirements for new developments that are getting a parking reduction with a parking study, through a parking study. So if it's a larger development that can afford to do a parking study to get further parking reductions, then perhaps that's the type of development that needs to have a parking management plan. We also, similar to middle housing, we have done outreach to date, and we brought this to the Development Services Advisory Group. The discussion there really focused mostly on the middle housing, so we didn't get a lot of feedback from here, but I think there was from them, but at least there were no red flags raised about the parking reductions near transit. So with that, again, I open this up for questions and comments. Again, I don't think we have any public that has joined us since before. And like middle housing, we think that we will likely bring this back following the community outreach that we do for middle housing. I think we want to keep that outreach focused on middle housing, but I think our energies will be focused on that immediately while we do continue to work on the background research on these code amendments. So with that, I will stop sharing.
And I did check, Mr. Chair, we have no one in the attendee room. And my apologies, I had a follow-up question for Dave. It was more just something to remind me to ask him about tomorrow. I didn't realize it was going to pop up on the screen. Sorry about that.
This is Tony Andrews. I had a question about the second to the last slide. You talked about what the green star was. I think it was an extension of something SWIFT. But what was the blue star?
The green star was where the SWIFT green line is likely to have a stop. The blue stars were other areas where we might want to encourage better transit service with additional with denser development.
So it's almost a case of, do we have the parking reductions follow the transit, or do we try to have the parking reductions drive the transit? Okay, commissioners, other comments, questions?
And I will add that while the previous parking transit reductions that date back to the 90s do add a level of complexity, I think that there's still room to move forward with parking reductions now. It's just that we need to take that into consideration in the analysis, especially with the analysis for the affordability requirements.
All right, Commissioner Westerbeck first, then Commissioner Dodd.
Sure. Thank you, Chair Kiernan. This is Commissioner Westerbeck. I know we talked a lot last meeting and a bit this meeting about parking management and enforcement. It tended to be more about parking management on sites of buildings, on private parking. And I know when I had originally discussed parking management, it was more the godfather of parking management, Donald Shoup's idea that if we were to reduce parking requirements, we have to better manage public parking resources. And so that's, I'm not sure if, and I'm not necessarily talking about the passes like in the packet, but just like was talked about at council probably 5 years ago by Tris Sandberg and other council members. If the city can someday afford to enforce like the 2-hour zones around downtown and so forth, so that people aren't parking for a week, 2 weeks at a time, or days at a time on public resources, so that there's the churn and business owners and apartment dwellers and stuff like that have a chance to use those. So that's what I think of when I think of parking management. City just there's millions of dollars worth of free parking that we don't manage. So that I just wanted to throw that out there because I feel like that's more of an issue than whatever private property owners do with their parking, which they usually will manage pretty carefully.
Thank you, Commissioner Westerbeck. I agree with that comment. Dave, you had a response?
Well, yes, and I think that what we've discussed to date is that we will put a finding that the city should pursue parking management, particularly in the denser areas like downtown, and but that's not part of these code amendments. Other than we do have the ability, at least the opening, to require private developments to provide parking management plans, like we have done downtown to some degree
Right.
through the compact stall design standards, but to make it more of a more systematic requirement and do it in a way that gives us some good data to understand, how the parking is being
Right.
managed. Yeah.
You mentioned that. Yeah, and I understand. First of all, it's basically a funding issue. It's a money problem, and it really is a council, priority. But it's their decision, not necessarily ours. So I think a finding of, is great. Anything we can do to place that in the minds of council members that this might improve things, especially as we do find ways to build more housing, maybe by reducing parking. So I appreciate it.
So Commissioner Dodd, then Commissioner Gustafson.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for the presentation, Dave. This might be a little nitpicky, and maybe it's just terminology, but I think instead of requiring a parking management plan for private developments that are going to get parking reductions through a study, I would rather see something that I don't know if I'm making up, which is a transportation management plan. So sure, making sure that they manage their parking is important, but developments are going to do that anyway, because your tenants are either going to complain and you're going to get sick of hearing it, so you're going to do it, or they're not going to renew. And, there's a lot of reasons to manage your parking as a private development, but I'd rather see the city require, like landlords of these developments provide their tenants with other options, right? Yes, we have this parking, we will manage it, but also here's a bus pass program. If you want to buy through our program, it's discounted because we're buying so many. Here's great routes, here's shuttle services. Like there's so many different options, like the community van that's parked near City Hall and everything, that I think people just don't know about. So I'd rather see us help those buildings with, like, here's some prepackaged collateral that you can customize and give out to your tenants, like encourage them other ways to get around. So I would love to see, instead of sort of administrating what they're going to do anyway by saying, tell us what your parking management plan is, let's give them a different kind of plan they need to provide to try and encourage less driving. And even part of that could be, convert some of this parking to bike parking, or stuff. We've talked about this, but I would love to see that sort of codified for when we do have these requirements of large developments. Like if you have a study that requires less parking, prove it, put in bike parking, give your tenants these options, that kind of stuff. And obviously this is just my opinion. I'd love to know if more commissioners would support that, so it's like our commission finding, but that's my instinct, is let's get a little more ahead of it. So thank you.
And I just respond, those are great ideas, and those would be elements of a parking management plan, as I'm seeing it, is what kind of incentives can they provide to encourage less demand for parking?
Okay, and my bad, sometimes things are named something, but it's not, super clear, and that's never been my avenue of work, so thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Commissioner Dodd. Commissioner Gustafson, and then Commissioner Westerbeck, do you have another comment, or is your hand still up? So
sorry, I do not. I meant to take it down. I apologize.
Okay. All right, Commissioner Gustafson.
Hi, thank you. Sarah Gustafson here, echoing the great comments from Commissioner Westerbeck on what Donald Shoup is telling us to do about the common resource of parking, and Commissioner Dodd's really on point plan. I think the reason why I really like Commissioner Dodd's plan is because it provides more of a carrot than a stick. And as I've said many times before, I'm really into parking management, but I'm also really worried about enforcement involving the police, and perhaps involving expanding the scope of the police when we might not want to do that for various reasons. And especially if that would result in disproportionate enforcement. Even if you can't see the person driving a car, it has been proven that parking and traffic management can often have a lot of bias in it. So whenever we come up with a finding, I think it's incumbent upon us to really think through the potential consequences of parking management.
Thank you, Commissioner Gustafson. I expect a very robust discussion when it comes to these findings. A lot of ideas have been floated during the course of these discussions, and there's a lot of passion around it. So I'll look forward to that. Other commissioner comments, questions? Director Cotterman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one quick response to Commissioner Gustafson's comment, and it's well stated, and I appreciate that. Just to let you know, the police would not be enforcing on private property. So if it's parking management on for private property, that would not be enforced by the city.
Commissioner Gustafson.
Oh, thank you, Chair. I do think our main concern is what Commissioner Westerbeck said about the public resource and the public commons, that we need to remove those cars that are just parked there for a long time. I mean,
Yes.
we're not reducing parking if people can just park there for free forever.
Right. No, and that's a good point. And for those public parking areas, yes, that is an enforcement issue, either through the police department or through a special parking enforcement division that usually resides within the police, not necessarily. I'm sorry, I thought you were referring to a parking management plan that would be part of a development on private property.
No,
Okay.
thank you.
My apologies.
Commissioner Dodd.
I was just wondering, Dave or Mike, could we see an example parking management plan? Do you have any like on file for any of the existing developments, so we could kind of see what that looks like before we talk about requiring it? Is that, sorry, that might be a little silly, but now I'm really curious.
What we've done, and this was something I developed when we were doing the phase one downtown parking study. And we did put together some I think we called it elements of parking management plan to give developers some guidance on the kind of information that we wanted to see in there. So I could certainly share that, and it's probably something that needs to be updated and fleshed out further. But again, I can do that in the upcoming packet.
And I don't know if we've actually had any done. Maybe Dave, you know of some, but if we haven't, we can look at other jurisdictions and what they've used too.
Yeah, we've received them for I know for Six Oaks, the Junction, I think most of the downtown plan projects required them. We added that requirement after a few of the projects had gone in. Addition Apartments, I believe, has one. So we can certainly provide the elements that we share with developers for those plans.
Was the Six Oaks plan just that the spots are so narrow that you don't want to park there? Sorry.
Well, and employers have been required for some time to have transportation management plans in this region, haven't they?
Employers of a certain size,
over a certain size,
need to comply with the commute trip reduction program. So,
right, over 100 employees on site.
And I recognize it's different, but there might be some ideas in that program which would be transferable.
Yeah, and just a reminder, so if you recall, one of the strategies in the action plan for the Canyon Park Sub-Area Plan was to create a TDM, or Transportation Demand Management Program there.
Yes.
And that's done in conjunction with the employers. And that's something that the city would work with them to get initiated. And it does a lot of the things that Commissioner Dodd was talking about earlier in terms of offering bus passes and bike parking and showers and all of that in order to reduce the amount of commuters that need to drive their cars or want to drive their cars. And the city received a grant from the state for $250,000 in this last session to start that program in Canyon Park. So we're very excited about that.
Good to hear.
And that could be a model for other parts of the city, if we can come up with, the funding to do all those things. It has to be sustainable, and that's really the key to it. I mean, it's one thing to get the program set up, but you have to make sure that it's self-sustaining over time, not just in terms of resources, but not just in terms of money, but in terms of staffing, and that doesn't have to be city staffing, but some staffing to make sure that it keeps going.
Okay, other commissioner questions, comments? Well, seeing none, I guess it was a brief discussion on parking. Somewhat surprising to me, but with that, I think we'll end tonight's study sessions. Again, there were no actions requested of us. It was a discussion to provide more feedback to staff. Both of these items will come back to us, and at some point there will be findings and recommendations, which I expect to have considerable discussion about. So with that, we will move on to the next agenda item. Was there someone? No. Unfinished business. Director Kahneman, do we have any unfinished business?
I don't believe so, Mr. Chair.
All right. It's not exactly unfinished business, but it is business that's ahead of us that I guess I'll throw in here. Pursuant, after joking about the bylaws with our new commissioner, I did go and look at them, and they do call for us to have election of officers in the first meeting in May. So you can look forward, chair and vice chair, election of officers in that first meeting. So you can give thought to that as it comes up. And Vice Chair Kerr is also aware of this coming up. So there being no other unfinished business, reports from staff.
So start your campaigning now for the May 3rd meeting. Thank you for that, Mr. Chair. So just a couple things coming up. It's been a very slow news day here at the office, so not a whole lot to report. But we have the public hearing coming up at your next meeting about the beekeeping. And so there'll be maybe some public comment on that. And we'll be asking for a recommendation that evening. You'll also get the introduction to the code amendment for the downtown historic preservation regulations. This is regarding some changes to the code for buildings that have been altered to a point where they may no longer be sustainable for the historic preservation purposes in terms of meeting those requirements of the code. Sustainable is not the right word there, but may no longer meet those requirements of the code for that part of the preservation. So it's providing some exceptions that don't currently exist in the code. So both of those are coming up on the 20th. Then next week at the city council meeting, we have a study session with the council. It's a budget discussion about the comp plan update. And it'll be a joint presentation by community development and public works for the major elements of the plan that we'll be looking at. There'll be several questions that we're looking for guidance from the council on. And I think those are all obviously going to be of interest to the commission because you're going to be doing a lot of the work on the comp plan. And we'll be coming to you soon with more about the scoping and start to have that discussion. The purpose of this discussion with the council is not to do the scoping so much as to get some guidance from them about how big of a scope do they want on the update, because that will determine our budget proposals that we put together for later in the year. And then we'll start the scoping discussion with the Planning Commission using that as our guide before we even get to the budget process. So that's coming up. City manager interviews were yesterday. Had an opportunity to participate in that as a member of the executive team here. And we had 4 good candidates. The council did not make a decision last night. They are going to continue that discussion, I believe, next week after their city council meeting on the 12th. We have deputy director interviews coming up next week. We had 29 applicants, which is outstanding. We have 8 that we're going to do preliminary reviews, or I should say interviews with next week. 5 of those are either current or former directors in other jurisdictions. So we've got, I think, a very good pool of candidates to choose from. And then a little bit about my schedule and the transition for the department. So my last official day with the city will be May 15th. The last day in the office is May 13th. That's the Friday. But I will be in and out during those last 3 weeks here. Jeff Smith, who's currently our Development Services Manager, who had planned on retiring June 3rd, has agreed to extend his time here at the city and not retire until the end of the summer. And we're very grateful to him for that. So he will be the acting director during that period. Once we get the new city manager on board, I'm presuming this will be one of the positions that he will want to fill sooner rather than later. So that process will get started fairly quickly, I would think. And I will be with you at your next meeting. So I will see you then. And if you have any questions in the meantime, you know where to find us. So appreciate that. And that's all I had, Mr. Chair.
Well, thank you, Director Cotterman. We have appreciated all you've done with the commission, your insights and direction for the staff. So good luck to you. Commissioner Gustafson, did I see you raise your hand?
Yes, I have a few things to say. The first thing is, Director Cotterman, about 2 years ago, I met some folks from the Bellevue city planning staff, and they said how lucky we were to get you and that they were jealous. And now it's our turn to say the same thing back to Bellevue. Also, I wanted to clarify when you said we have applications for deputy director, did you mean deputy city manager, or I'm confused? Deputy director of which?
Deputy Director for Community Development.
Okay, because are we having a new position there? I do apologize. I must be out of it.
No, that's okay. I thought I had mentioned it in a previous meeting. I may not have. So because Jeff Smith, as Development Services Manager, when his retirement plans were known, I had that position reclassified to be a deputy director for the department. Okay. Yeah, and that was in the works regardless. It had nothing to do. It was really part of overall succession planning for the department before this Bellevue change came up.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, now it's coming back to me a little bit. So thank you for that. And then the last question I had was a request, I guess, for reports from staff. I am curious to know what is happening with the Bothell United Methodist plan to purchase a property downtown. Mm-hmm. Last I heard, they were expanding the scope of what they were doing, or expanding the property, and wanted to get an update. Thank you.
Thanks for the question. I can give you a real quick update on that, and Commissioner Westerbeck can probably tell you more than I can about it, because he's involved with the Bothell Urban Group at the church that's working on that. From the city standpoint, our direction from the council last year was to work with Bothell United Methodist on the proposal. And we have been doing that. We've had several meetings with them. We were meeting with them and Sound Transit at one time when Sound Transit was still looking at doing parking garage on the P South property. For Commissioner Anders' benefit, I don't know if you're familiar with all of the downtown properties, Commissioner. When we refer to P South, so if you think of downtown, if you know where the Pop is located, right next to Pop Keeney Stadium, this is that vacant property that's across Thorsk Street from there, behind Six Oaks, next to the new office building that was just put in, behind the junction. Just went blank on the name of the junction. So it's one of those properties that the city purchased from the school district and still owns. And there was some contamination on the site that we're this close to getting cleaned up. So we've been working with the church that has proposed to do an affordable housing project. They've joined with Habitat for Humanity and also now Bridge Housing. So the latest discussions with them, I think we've gotten all of our questions answered. They've gotten their questions answered. We are scheduled to take a briefing to the city council and get some additional direction from them on May 3rd. So that's sort of it in a nutshell. There's obviously a lot more details that still have to be worked out. That's part of the discussion we're going to have with the council. And I don't know if Commissioner Westerbeck, if you have anything you want to add to that.
That was a great, everyone there. Sorry, my internet was getting a little wacky. that was great synopsis, Director Codman. Thank you. The only thing I'd add is the reason we're expanding Commissioner Gustafson is it's easier for us as the private group, the Bothell Urban Group. We realized to work with the city on the entire property instead of trying to ask for it to be sliced the way Sound Transit would have. So we've expanded to bring in bridge housing because they are very interested in doing the affordable housing on the rest of the property. So I think Director Cotterman covered that, but that's just kind of fleshing out. We're going to try and develop the entire thing. So it'll be bigger, there'll be more affordable housing by a long shot than we would have had. So that's actually good. And Habitat would do for sale condos at reduced, cost, and then we'd have reduced rentals with bridge. So kind of probably 2/3, 1/3 sort of thing.
Very exciting project.
I think so.
Commissioner Dodd?
Thanks. I was just going to add too, we got, I'm a parishioner at Bothell United Methodist as well. And we got some of an update in last Sunday's service. And then also Kristen Joyner is and I'm going to get this totally wrong, but is like the pastor of community outreach. So she would be a great resource to reach out to as well. And I know you know her, Sarah, but just for everyone else, her name is Kristen Joyner, and she'd be happy to talk to anybody about the project. So yeah, just to throw her name out there.
She is a major promoter of the project. Yes, we enjoy working with her. She's very passionate about this, and I appreciate that.
All right. So Director Cotterman, does that mean Sound Transit's plan for a parking structure in Bothell is no longer in place?
Is kaput. Yes, they when they did their realignment last year because of the budget shortfalls they were facing, if not all, most all of their parking proposed parking structures as part of the system were deferred for at least 10 years.
So the existing park and ride will remain as is for.
That's another matter, actually. That's owned by Metro. And we have been in conversation on and off with Metro about future development of that site as transit-oriented development. And they're certainly open to the idea, but I don't think it's high on their list of projects right now. But certainly they're well aware of the city's interest in seeing something happen on that site that's more than just a park and ride. And I know that that's part of Metro's mission as well. So when they are ready to do something, they know that we're interested and we'll have more of those conversations.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you, Director Cotterman. And I think that concludes reports from staff.
Yes. Unless Dave has anything to add, that's all I had this evening. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Reports from members. Would someone like to speak to the Seattle Times? Commissioner Dodd.
Sure. Commissioner Westerbeck and I got the chance to speak with Daniel Beekman of the Seattle Times just to talk about non-commission stuff. You'll notice neither of us are cited as commissioners, about Main Street being open to pedestrians and non-car traffic, and the council's recent decision to maintain that for a while. And it was a really great article that quoted both of us and many other Bothell residents, people that Mr. Beekman interviewed while he was touring Main Street. There's a great photo of a kid just running down the street in the article. It's super cute. And then a lot of business owners too. And I really appreciated that it was well-rounded and talked. Obviously, I spoke for it. There were business owners for it and against it, and talked to the different challenges that the city has to address as we look at this as a potentially more permanent thing. I'll defer to Commissioner Westerbeck if he wants to say.
I don't need to. I think that was a great synopsis. Many of you probably read it. So if not, probably a good read. Quick.
Bothell's on the front page of the paper for good reasons.
Yeah, above the fold.
Great photos too.
Yes, for those who are used to the old hard copy newspaper, above the fold is a big deal. So very well placed. Other commissioners, reports from members. Commissioner Westerbeck.
I'll be brief, but I went to the Congress for New Urbanism conference in Oklahoma City a couple weeks ago that I had mentioned the last meeting, and learned a lot. It was exciting to see that. So they're all about new urbanism, you know, making walkable towns and so forth. A lot of kinds of stuff that we essentially advocate for here in Bothell, or moving towards missing middle type housing and things. But this year the theme was climate change and equity, and there was a much greater diversity this year, and participants were across the spectrum from all different places and types of people and cultures, and they're doing a pretty good job of expanding that out and going very hard on making sure every kind of group in North America is included, and trying to expand into Mexico more, as well as working really, really hard on what members can be doing about climate change in the places they plan and design. So it was pretty exciting. A lot of really interesting thoughts and ideas. So anyway, it's tons of planners, so it's super related to Planning Commission, but a lot more that I could go into in a brief report. But it's exciting work being done, and it's fun to see them tackling the most urgent issues of the day. And of course, housing is centered on those equity and climate change issues very much, as well as far as transportation. So it's fun.
Thank you, Commissioner Westerbeck. Other reports from members? Seeing none, we have a standing item report to council, since the council has a standing item report from commissions. Anything that commissioners feel should be brought to council's attention at this time? And I do not see anyone there either. So I believe we've reached the conclusion. Oh, Commissioner Dodd.
I move to adjourn the meeting.
So there is a motion to adjourn. Is there a second? Commissioner Robson.
Second the motion.
All right. I don't believe there's any discussion on that motion. So all in favor of adjourn? And I see unanimous consent visually. All commissioners have raised their hand. So that said, we will adjourn the April 6th meeting of the Bothell Planning Commission tonight at 7:29 per my computer. Our next meeting will be April 20th. It'll be chaired by Vice Chair Curd. So you all have a good night, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you. A tidy 90 minutes.
Good night.
Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
See everyone. Thank you.